Think of the word okay, two tiny letters we use every day. But here's the strange part. It started as a joke in the 1800s. A Boston newspaper printed okay as a playful misspelling of all correct, spelled with O's and K's instead of A's and C's. Nobody expected it to last. Yet somehow that little joke became the most recognized word on earth. And it's not the only habit with a surprising backstory. Why do we shake hands? Why do we cross our fingers for luck? Why are black cats unlucky? And why do we blow out candles on a cake? Every custom we take for granted carries an origin, sometimes practical, sometimes superstitious, sometimes deadly. If you enjoy discovering surprising stories like these, remember to subscribe, give this video a like, and share in the comments what other kinds of stories you'd like me to tell to help you fall asleep. Now, let's drift into our first origin, the handshake. When you extend your hand in greeting, you are part of a ritual that goes back thousands of years. In ancient times, meeting a stranger was dangerous. You could not be sure if they carried a weapon or meant you harm. The handshake was a simple solution. By offering your right hand, the hand most often used to hold a sword, you showed that it was empty. It was a gesture of trust, but also of vulnerability. If the other person took your hand, it meant they too had put aside their weapon. Over the centuries, this gesture of survival softened into a symbol of peace, respect, and honesty. Today, we use handshakes to seal deals, to greet one another formally, or simply to show goodwill. But every time palms meet, they still echo that ancient promise. I come without harm, and I trust you. The salute, the military salute, began long before uniforms and parades. Its roots lie in medieval knighthood. Knights wore heavy helmets with metal visors that covered their faces. When one knight approached another, he would raise his right hand to lift the visor and reveal his eyes. That simple act carried meaning. See me. I am no enemy. You can trust me. As time passed and helmets disappeared, the gesture remained. Soldiers continued to raise their right hands as a sign of respect, not to lift a visor, but to carry forward the tradition. The modern salute, sharp and formal, is a descendant of that knightly action. It is still used between officers and soldiers, between equals in service, and in ceremonies around the world. Though the steel has long since vanished, the salute still carries the same weight: recognition, respect, and a bond of shared duty. Bowing. Bowing is one of the oldest gestures of humility. Its meaning lies in vulnerability. By lowering your head and exposing the back of your neck, you offer your most fragile point to another person. In ancient times, this was a sign of surrender, a way of placing yourself at someone else's mercy. Over centuries, the gesture softened. In Asia, it became a cornerstone of etiquette, used to express respect, apology, or gratitude. In Europe, bowing survived in courts and ceremonies, directed toward rulers, nobles, or spiritual leaders. Even today, the act of bowing retains its quiet power. It communicates more than words. I lower myself in honor of you. Whether it is a deep formal bow or a small polite dip, The motion still carries the echo of ancient vulnerability transformed into courtesy. The nod is a smaller version of the bow. Instead of lowering the whole body, only the head dips slightly forward. Yet the meaning is the same: acknowledgement, respect, and agreement. Anthropologists suggest it evolved as a practical substitute for bowing, a gesture small enough to use in everyday conversation. Shaking the head is saying the word no. Few gestures are as universally understood as shaking the head to mean no. Its origin lies not in language, but in infancy. Long before they can talk, babies communicate with their bodies. When offered food they don't want, they instinctively turn their heads away. That small motion, side to side, refusing what is offered, became a human pattern that carried into adulthood. Over generations, it solidified into a universal gesture of rejection. When you shake your head today, you are echoing the earliest communication of infants, a gesture born at the dinner table long before words. It is one of the few nonverbal signs recognized across cultures, an instinct as old as humanity itself. The next time you move your head to say no, you are tapping into an ancient, childlike refusal that still speaks clearly across the world. A wave seems cheerful and light, but it began as a signal of reassurance. In a time when meeting a stranger could mean danger, an open hand raised high sent a message: I am unarmed. The gesture was practical and life-saving. Over time, it shifted from a defensive habit into a social one. People waved not just to prove they carried no weapon, but to greet across a distance. Even as the need for the gesture faded, the motion endured. Today, a wave carries friendliness, warmth, and welcome. Yet at its heart, it still says what it once did in a more serious age: you are safe with me. A small lift of the hand carries centuries of meaning, turning fear into friendliness. Kissing on the cheek. In many countries, a kiss on the cheek is an ordinary greeting, but its story begins in ancient Rome, where suspicion of poison was common. Sharing a kiss was a way to prove safety. If someone could kiss without fear, it meant their mouth was empty of poison, their intentions trustworthy. Over time, what began as a safeguard became a tradition of closeness. The Romans practiced different kinds of kisses for different relationships, from family to friends. That tradition survived, changing slowly into the modern cheek kiss of greeting we know today. Now it is an expression of warmth and familiarity. Yet behind every polite kiss on the cheek is the shadow of its beginning, an ancient test of loyalty and safety. The handshake grip test. A handshake was not always just a simple touch of hands. In earlier times, the strength of the grip was just as important. A weak handshake raised suspicion, while a firm one suggested honesty. Why? Because a strong squeeze reassured the other person that no dagger or weapon was hidden up the sleeve. The harder the grip, the less chance of deception. Over time, this practical concern faded, but the habit endured. Even now, many people believe a firm handshake reflects confidence and character, while a limp one signals weakness or mistrust. A judgment formed in seconds comes from a ritual that began as a check for hidden weapons. What we treat today as a personality test once helped keep people alive. The thumbs up feels casual now, but its origin lies in the deadly world of Roman gladiators. In the arena, a fighter's fate could hinge on a single hand signal from the crowd or the emperor. Contrary to the Hollywood myth, thumbs down did not always mean death. In fact, the raised thumb often signaled mercy, a choice to spare the defeated fighter. That gesture of life or death eventually lost its deadly weight but survived in memory. As centuries passed, the thumbs up came to mean approval, encouragement, and success. Today we toss it casually to mean good job, forgetting that in Rome, that same movement once carried the power to decide a man's fate. Crossing fingers for luck. Crossing fingers is often playful today, a way to say I hope for the best. But its origins are serious, rooted in secrecy and faith. In the early centuries of Christianity, believers lived under persecution. To recognize one another, they used symbols and subtle gestures. One of these was the crossing of fingers, a hidden sign of the cross. It was a silent prayer, a plea for protection, a mark of shared belief. As time went on, the religious meaning faded, replaced by superstition. People began to use crossed fingers as a way to ward off bad luck, then simply to hope for good fortune. What was once a hidden act of faith became a cultural habit. Even now, when you cross your fingers, you are echoing the secret prayers of early Christians, holding hope between your hands. Toasting with drinks, imagine sitting at a table centuries ago, sharing wine or ale with people you didn't entirely trust. Poison was a very real danger, and fear of betrayal was constant. To counter this, people began to slam their cups together in a toast, hard enough that drops of liquid from one cup splashed into another. If your drink mixed with mine, then neither of us could have poisoned the other. It was both a test of loyalty and a ritual of trust. Over time, as poisoning became less of a worry, the motion softened to a simple clink of glasses, but at its heart, it remains a gesture of shared safety and companionship. Salt on the table. In the ancient world, salt was far more than seasoning. It was wealth. Before refrigeration, salt preserved food, kept armies supplied, and allowed trade to flourish. In some places, salt was even used as currency. Roman soldiers were partly paid in salt, giving us the word salary. To place salt on the table was not just about flavor, but about trust and loyalty. Sharing salt meant sharing wealth and stability. To this day, spilling salt is seen as bad luck, because wasting such a valuable resource was once unthinkable. What sits casually in a shaker today was once a symbol of prosperity, survival, and honor between friends. Baking bread together. Few acts are as symbolic as breaking bread. In ancient cultures, bread was the staple of life, the food that sustained communities. Sharing it with someone else was more than kindness. It was a declaration of peace. By breaking bread together, enemies could end hostilities, neighbors could seal bonds, and families could reaffirm loyalty. The gesture crossed cultures and religions, becoming part of sacred rituals as well as daily life. Today, the phrase breaking bread still carries that meaning of connection. Whether it is at a holiday table or a simple meal with friends, to share bread is to share trust and fellowship, just as it has been for thousands of years. Cutting the wedding cake. At weddings, the moment when the bride and groom cut the cake together feels like pure celebration, but its roots go deeper, back to ancient fertility rites. Cutting and sharing food at a wedding symbolized abundance, prosperity, and the hope for children. In some cultures, the cake itself was broken over the bride's head, showering her with crumbs meant to bring fertility and good fortune. Over time, the act became gentler, and couples began cutting the cake together, showing unity and partnership. What began as a fertility ritual is now a sweet moment of togetherness, a symbolic promise that the couple will share life's sweetness and challenges side by side. Birthday candles. When you place candles on a cake, you are performing a ritual with roots in ancient Greece. People would place candles on offerings to Artemis, the goddess of the moon, to make the cakes glow like her shining orb. The smoke that rose carried their prayers and wishes up to the heavens. Over time, this practice transformed into birthday traditions. Lighting candles on a cake symbolized bringing light and blessings to the person celebrating. Blowing them out with a secret wish in mind carried the old belief that smoke carried hopes upward to the divine. A simple childhood game of blowing out flames is, in fact, a ritual thousands of years old, tying human wishes to the gods. Saying cheers. The custom of raising a glass and saying cheers is more than politeness. It is a wish for survival. In medieval times, life was harsh. Food and drink could be unsafe, and illness was never far away. To drink together was to face those risks as a group. Saying cheers was a way of wishing one another good health, good fortune, and protection from danger. It turned drinking into a communal act of solidarity. Even today, when we raise a glass and say cheers, we are repeating those old hopes. It is not just a word. It is a blessing spoken in the middle of celebration to remind us of life's fragility and joy. Thanksgiving turkey. When Americans gather for Thanksgiving, the turkey is the centerpiece. But why turkey and not another animal? The choice was deliberate. In the early days of the United States, turkey was uniquely American. It wasn't tied to European traditions, and it represented the land itself. Unlike cattle or pigs, which had long histories in Europe, turkey was a bird native to the continent. Serving it on a national holiday emphasized identity and independence. Over time, it became tradition, a symbol of unity and gratitude. Today, the turkey represents far more than a meal. It embodies the spirit of the holiday itself, chosen not for taste alone, but for meaning. Chopsticks. In China, chopsticks became the standard eating utensil, but not for convenience alone. Their rise was connected to an effort to reduce aggression at the table. Knives were weapons as well as tools, and placing them at meals carried an unspoken threat. Chopsticks, in contrast, were peaceful instruments, designed only for eating, not for harm. Their widespread use helped shift the culture of dining from one of potential violence to one of harmony. Beyond their practicality, they symbolized a different way of life, communal, gentle, and refined. Every time chopsticks are lifted today, they carry with them the philosophy that meals should be about sharing, not conflict. Spilling salt. If salt was once a treasure, wasting it was unthinkable. That is why spilling salt came to be seen as unlucky. The superstition deepened with Christian tradition, where one story tells that Judas Iscariot, the disciple who betrayed Jesus, spilled salt at the Last Supper. From then on, a toppled salt container became a symbol of betrayal and misfortune. To counter the bad luck, people began tossing a pinch of the spilled grains over their left shoulder, where the devil was thought to lurk. Today, the belief may seem quaint, but the ritual remains. A grain of salt on the floor is still treated with care, carrying with it centuries of fear, betrayal, and attempts to keep evil away. Wedding rings on the left hand. The tradition of wearing wedding rings on the left hand dates back to ancient Rome. People believed there was a special vein in the fourth finger of the left hand called the vena amoris, the vein of love, that led directly to the heart. By placing a ring there, it symbolized an eternal bond, a physical connection of love flowing straight into the heart. While modern anatomy has proven that no such vein exists, the symbolism endured. Across centuries, the left-hand ring finger became the universal marker of marriage. Today, when couples exchange rings, they are not only making a promise, but also echoing an ancient belief that love has a direct line to the heart. White wedding dresses. Before the 19th century, brides wore dresses of any color, often choosing their best garment rather than something new. That changed in 1840 when Queen Victoria married Prince Albert in a stunning white gown. The dress was not chosen for purity, but to showcase fine English lace. Yet the symbolism of white as innocence and virtue quickly caught on. Across Europe and America, white wedding dresses became the standard, imitating the Queen's fashion. What began as a royal choice turned into a cultural expectation. Today, brides in much of the world wear white as if it were timeless tradition, but it is, in truth, a relatively modern invention inspired by a queen's taste. Neckties. The necktie has a surprisingly martial origin. In the 17th century, Croatian soldiers serving in the French army wore distinctive scarves knotted around their necks. These scarves marked their regiments and kept their collars secure. The French took notice, and the style, called the cravat from the word croat, became fashionable among the upper classes. Over the centuries, the cravat evolved, slimming down and changing shape until it became the modern tie. What began as a soldier's uniform accessory is now an office staple, a symbol of formality and professionalism. Each time someone knots a tie, they are unknowingly repeating a gesture born on the battlefield. High heels. High heels were not created for fashion, but for warfare. In the 10th century, Persian cavalry soldiers wore shoes with elevated heels to secure their feet in stirrups. The added height helped them control their horses in battle, especially when shooting arrows while riding. When Europeans encountered this design, they adopted it, first for military purposes, then as a mark of aristocracy. Heels gave men stature and authority, making them seem taller and more commanding. Only later did they become associated with women's fashion. What started as a tool of war eventually transformed into a symbol of elegance, sophistication, and sometimes discomfort, a far cry from their original battlefield purpose. Lipstick. The practice of coloring lips stretches back to ancient civilizations, but the Egyptians perfected it. They created rich red dyes by crushing cochineal insects and mixing them with oils and waxes. The bold color was not just cosmetic, it was a symbol of power, status, and even spiritual protection. Cleopatra herself is said to have worn lipstick as part of her royal image. To the Egyptians, painted lips were more than beauty. They were authority, a mark that set rulers and the wealthy apart from commoners. Over centuries, lipstick carried shifting meanings, from scandal to glamour, but its roots lie in the idea that painted lips could command attention and power. Powdered wigs. In 17th century Europe, wigs became more than fashion. They were necessity. Syphilis spread rapidly, and one of its symptoms was hair loss. Men, especially among the wealthy, turned to wigs to hide baldness and sores. To keep them clean and mask odors, wigs were powdered, often with scented starch. Soon they became status symbols. Judges, nobles, and kings wore elaborate wigs as marks of authority and wealth. Though the disease faded, the fashion persisted. In Britain, judges still wear them today as a symbol of tradition. A solution born of illness transformed into a cultural marker, linking power, law, and respectability to a powdered head of hair. Shaving beards in armies. Facial hair has long been a mark of masculinity, but in Alexander the Great's army, it was banned. The reason was simple and practical. In hand-to-hand combat, beards could be grabbed by the enemy, giving them an advantage. To prevent this, Alexander ordered his soldiers to shave. The rule spread, and clean-shaven soldiers became associated with discipline and readiness for war. Over time, the practice of shaving took on broader meanings of hygiene and modernity. But its origins were brutally practical. A soldier without a beard was harder to defeat in battle. Every clean shave still carries the echo of Alexander's command. Top hats. When top hats first appeared in late 18th century London, they were shocking. So tall and bold in design, they startled the public. One story tells that when haberdasher John Hetherington wore one in 1797, it caused a crowd to panic, leading to broken windows and even fainting. The authorities fined him for disturbing the peace. Yet, despite the uproar, the style caught on. By the 19th century, the top hat was a mark of elegance and respectability, worn by politicians, businessmen, and gentlemen. What began as a scandalous novelty became the defining symbol of authority and fashion in its time. Today, the top hat survives only in ceremonies, a relic of an era when a piece of clothing could shock a city. Piercings. Sailors often wore earrings, and not just for decoration. One belief was that piercing the ear, especially with gold, improved eyesight. The idea came from acupuncture points in folk medicine, which suggested that pressure at the ear lobe influenced vision. Beyond superstition, earrings also served practical purposes. The gold in a sailor's earring could pay for a burial if he died at sea. Piercings were marks of travel, experience, and survival. Over time, the practice spread into fashion across societies, shifting from superstition and practicality into art and identity. Today's piercings are personal statements, but once they were charms of health and fortune on the open sea. Buttons on opposite sides. Men's and women's clothing fastens differently. Men's buttons on the right, women's on the left. This small detail has a curious history. For men, buttons were placed on the right so they could easily unfasten jackets with their dominant hand, often to draw a sword or weapon. For women, buttons were placed on the left because many wealthy women were dressed by servants. With the buttons reversed, it was easier for a maid facing them to fasten clothing. What started as a practical decision about swords and servants became tradition, carried into modern fashion. Today, the difference remains, even though swords and maids have long since disappeared. Knocking on wood. When people say something hopeful, they often knock on wood to avoid tempting fate. This habit goes back to ancient pagan beliefs where trees were thought to house protective spirits. By touching or knocking on wood, people believed they were calling on those spirits for protection, asking them to guard against misfortune. The gesture also symbolized grounding oneself, keeping luck from slipping away. Even after belief in tree spirits faded, the practice survived as superstition. Today, when someone says, "I haven't been sick all year," and quickly knocks on a wooden table, they are echoing a ritual thousands of years old. A small tap meant to call unseen guardians to keep good fortune safe. Friday the 13th, superstition. Many people still feel uneasy when the calendar lands on Friday the 13th. The superstition has multiple roots, but one of the strongest comes from the Middle Ages. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered the arrest of the Knights Templar, a powerful military order. Hundreds were imprisoned, tortured, or executed, and the day became marked with betrayal and bad luck. Combined with Christian tradition where Friday was associated with the crucifixion of Jesus, the number 13 itself was already seen as unlucky, one too many at the Last Supper table. Together the date and the day merged into a powerful omen. Even now, Friday the 13th carries the shadow of that history, a day many still treat with caution. Throwing rice at weddings. At the end of a wedding, guests often toss rice over the bride and groom. This cheerful act actually comes from ancient fertility rituals. Rice, like wheat and other grains, symbolized abundance, life, and prosperity. Showering the couple in it was a way to bless them with many children and a fruitful future. The grain itself carried power. It was the seed of new life, something every society depended on. While today rice is sometimes replaced with confetti or bird seed, the symbolism remains. The throwing is not just a playful tradition, but a reminder of humanity's oldest wish for new couples, fertility, growth, and a life filled with abundance. Housewarming. Inviting people to a housewarming is more than a celebration of moving in. The tradition began literally with fire. In centuries past, when families entered a new home, they would light the hearth using coals or flames brought from the fires of their old home or from neighbors. This ritual warmed the house, driving away spirits and bringing comfort and luck. Guests would sometimes bring wood to feed the fire, offering warmth in both a physical and symbolic sense. Over time, the act of lighting a fire evolved into gatherings with food, drink, and company. A housewarming today may not involve flames, but at its heart it still carries the same message, filling a new home with warmth, community, and blessings. Carrying the bride over the threshold. The image of a groom carrying his bride into their new home is romantic today, but its roots are in superstition. In ancient times, the threshold of a house was believed to be a place where spirits gathered, waiting to cause mischief. If a bride stumbled while entering, it was seen as a bad omen for the marriage. To protect her, the groom carried her across the doorway, keeping her safe from both clumsy steps and lurking spirits. This act was also seen as a display of strength and protection. Though we no longer fear spirits at the door, the gesture survives as a sweet tradition, symbolizing care and the start of a shared life together. Breaking a wishbone. After a feast, many families pull apart a wishbone for luck. This ritual goes back to the Romans, who believed that birds, especially chickens, had divine powers of prediction. The wishbone or furcula was seen as a magical object. Holding it, people would make wishes, believing the bone carried mystical energy. Eventually, the bone was dried and broken between two people. Whoever ended up with the larger piece was thought to have their wish granted. The tradition crossed into Europe and America, surviving long after its spiritual meaning faded. Today, it is a playful moment at meals, but its roots lie in the belief that bones carry the whispers of the gods. Throwing shoes at weddings. An unusual old English custom involved throwing shoes at newlyweds. In medieval times, shoes symbolized authority and transfer of power. Fathers would give a shoe to a groom as a sign of giving away their daughter. Guests took this further, tossing shoes at the couple as a way of bestowing luck and fertility. Over time, the practice softened into tying shoes to the back of the wedding car, a tradition still seen today. Though the meaning has largely been forgotten, the roots remain. Shoes once represented both blessing and transition. Every dangling shoe tied to a bumper carries the faint echo of those medieval gifts. New Year's resolutions. At the start of each year, millions make promises to change habits, improve health, or be better people. This tradition reaches back to ancient Babylon over 4,000 years ago. Babylonians celebrated the new year in spring with a festival called Akichu. During it, they promised their gods to repay debts and return borrowed items, hoping the gods would favor them in the coming year. The Romans later adopted similar practices, making vows to Janus, the two-faced god of beginnings, whose month gave us January. Today, resolutions are more personal than religious, but the impulse is the same. Each January, we echo ancient pledges, hoping the fresh year brings renewal and favor. April Fool's Day. Every April 1st, people play pranks and jokes, but the origins of this day of trickery lie in confusion. In 1582, France adopted the Gregorian calendar, moving the start of the year from April 1st to January 1st. Many people were slow to adjust or resisted the change, continuing to celebrate in April. These fools became the targets of jokes, tricks, and ridicule. Over time, the custom spread to other countries, shedding its connection to the calendar, but keeping the playful spirit. Today, April Fool's Day is a worldwide celebration of humor and mischief. Beneath the laughter, though, lies a reminder of how deeply calendars and traditions once shaped people's lives. Jack-o'-lanterns. The glowing face of a jack-o'-lantern is a familiar Halloween sight, but its origin is Irish. The story tells of Stingy Jack, a trickster who cheated the devil and was cursed to wander the earth. With no place in heaven or hell, he carried a hollowed-out turnip lit with a coal to guide his way. People in Ireland carved their own turnips or potatoes, placing lights inside to ward off Jack's spirit and other wandering souls. When Irish immigrants came to America, they found pumpkins, larger and easier to carve, and the tradition shifted. Today's pumpkin jack-o'-lanterns still carry the essence of that story. Lights shining against the dark, protecting homes from restless spirits. Handshake sealing deals. The handshake is one of the oldest ways to make an agreement binding. In Roman times, two parties would clasp hands to seal a contract, not just as a gesture of trust, but as a sacred bond. The grip was seen as a physical contract, harder to break than words alone. Coins and artwork from Rome show clasped hands as symbols of loyalty and commitment. To break a handshake agreement was to break one's honor. Today, we still shake hands when closing business deals, signing contracts, or forming partnerships. Behind every handshake lies the echo of Roman belief that the meeting of hands is as binding as ink on paper. Deadline day. A deadline means the final date for finishing a task. But its origin is far darker. During the American Civil War, prison camps marked boundaries around their enclosures with a line drawn on the ground, often a few feet inside the stockade walls. Guards warned prisoners that if they crossed this dead line, they would be shot on sight. The word was deadly literal, a boundary that meant life or death. After the war, the term slipped into publishing, where newspapers referred to the time by which copy had to be submitted as the deadline. From there it spread into business and everyday speech. What was once a matter of survival is now a measure of productivity. Clapping applause is so natural that we hardly think about it, but the custom began in ancient Rome. At public plays and speeches, audiences needed a way to show approval. Shouts and cheers worked, but clapping, the rhythmic striking of hands, became the standard. Roman emperors even encouraged applause, sometimes hiring claqueurs or professional clappers to lead the crowd. Over time, the act spread across cultures as the universal signal of appreciation. Today, clapping fills theaters, stadiums, and ceremonies around the world. What started as a Roman habit of approval has become humanity's shared language for joy and praise. Standing ovation. A standing ovation feels like the highest honor an audience can give, but it was once reserved for rulers. In ancient Rome, when emperors entered a space, the entire crowd would rise to their feet. It was a show of respect, loyalty, and even fear. Over time, the gesture shifted into the arts, reserved for performances that truly moved audiences. To stand while applauding became a mark of deep admiration. Now it is given to athletes, leaders, and artists alike. Yet every time people rise to clap, they echo a gesture once meant only for emperors, a tradition transformed from authority to appreciation. Throwing confetti. At weddings and celebrations, colorful confetti rains down. Its ancestor was not paper but seeds. In ancient Rome, guests threw grains and nuts over newlyweds as blessings of fertility, abundance, and prosperity. Seeds symbolized new beginnings, just as crops grew from soil. In time, real seeds were replaced by colored sugar pellets, and eventually by bright paper confetti. The meaning, however, remained the same, a wish for growth, life, and joy. What began as a farmer's symbol of fertility became a playful shower of color, still marking moments of happiness with the echo of ancient fields. Parades. The first parades were not festive strolls, but demonstrations of military might. In ancient Rome, victorious generals returned from war in a grand procession called the Triumph. Soldiers marched, captives were displayed, and treasures were shown off to prove the glory of victory. The people lined the streets, cheering as the power of Rome paraded before them. Over centuries, the idea of a parade shifted from war to celebration. Instead of armies, floats, costumes, and music filled the streets. Yet every parade today, from carnival to national holiday, carries a trace of its roots. Public displays meant to inspire awe and pride. Fireworks. The dazzling explosions of fireworks began in China nearly 2,000 years ago. The earliest versions were not for entertainment, but for protection. People discovered that bamboo thrown into fire would burst with a loud crack. The noise was believed to scare away evil spirits. Later, when gunpowder was invented, it was packed into tubes to create louder blasts and brighter sparks. These fiery displays became central to festivals, weddings, and New Year celebrations. When fireworks spread to Europe, they became symbols of celebration and power. Today, their brilliant lights fill skies worldwide, but at their core, fireworks are still what they were in ancient China, noise and flame to drive away darkness. Victory V sign. The V made with 2 fingers is a modern symbol of victory, but it has older roots in English folklore. During medieval wars, English archers were feared for their deadly longbows. If captured, they risked having their bow fingers cut off so they could never shoot again. Legend says archers would taunt their enemies by raising those 2 fingers, showing they were still intact. Though historians debate the accuracy, the story remains powerful. Centuries later, Winston Churchill revived the V for victory sign during World War II, giving it global meaning. Today, the gesture stands for triumph and peace, fingers raised as proof of strength and survival. Handshake with gloves off. In colder times, gloves were common, but in matters of trust, they were removed. A handshake with gloves on was seen as dishonest, since gloves could hide weapons, poison, or trickery. By removing them, you showed openness, proving your hand was empty and clean. The custom became part of etiquette, especially in business and diplomacy. To shake hands bare was to meet as equals, with nothing hidden. Even now, though gloves are less common, the rule lingers. The truest handshake is skin to skin, echoing centuries of caution against deceit. Whistling in theaters. Many actors consider whistling backstage bad luck, but the superstition has a practical origin. In the early days of theater, stagehands often came from sailing backgrounds, where whistles were used to signal rigging crews. Theaters borrowed the system, using whistles to cue movement of sets and scenery. If someone whistled casually backstage, it could trigger the wrong cue, dropping heavy equipment at the wrong time, sometimes with deadly results. The danger turned into superstition, and whistling became taboo. Even today, theaters avoid it, carrying forward the memory of when a casual whistle could bring disaster on stage. And there you have it. The surprising origins of the everyday things we do, wear, and believe. From handshakes and wedding rings to fireworks in the sky and knocking on wood, each tradition carries echoes of the past, whispers of the people who came before us. If you enjoyed this journey through history's little secrets, remember to subscribe, give this video a like, and share in the comments what other kinds of stories you'd like me to tell to help you fall asleep. Thank you for spending this time with me. May your night be calm, your dreams be gentle, and your sleep be deep. Until next time, good night.